Mafia boss sees the scars on a waitress's face. What he did next stunned the whole city. Her hand trembled as she poured his wine, sleeves slipping just enough to reveal a scar that would burn the city down. Ricardo and Drizzy saw it, and in that quiet, dangerous way only he could, he made a promise. Someone was about to disappear. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. The air between them thickened, the soft piano, the quiet clink of glasses, the scent of lemon and oak that filled La Fiora. To anyone watching, he was just another man dining alone. But the city knew better. Ricardo wasn't a man who made small talk. He was a man whose silence meant something was about to change. Every afternoon, table 6 was his. Same seat by the window, same order, espresso, steak, 1 glass of Barolo. He ruled Palermo's underworld the way others ruled boardrooms, through observation. He noticed what people tried to hide: the fake smiles, the lies and laughter, the tremor in a guilty man's hand. So when the waitress leaned forward and her sleeve fell, his instincts sharpened like a blade drawn in a church. She pulled the fabric back down fast, too fast. Her name tag caught the light, Ramona. Up close, he saw it now. Faint bruises around her cheekbone, the kind you only get when someone doesn't want the world to see what they've done. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might apologize for existing. Ricardo's voice was calm, low. "Who hurt you?" Her eyes flicked up, startled. "No one, sir." He didn't blink. "Don't lie to me." "I'm fine," she whispered, clutching the bottle like it might save her. "It's nothing." He leaned back, studying her. The fear, the tremor, the practiced obedience of someone who's learned that silence is safer than truth. Then he simply nodded. "All right." She turned, retreating to the kitchen, shoulders stiff, breath uneven. And for a moment, the world went still. Ricardo watched the door close behind her. The dining room noise returned, forks clinking, whispers, a laugh from the bar, but he didn't hear any of it. That one scar had changed everything. Whoever marked her had just signed their own death warrant, whether they knew it or not. He reached for his phone. "Marco," he said quietly when his lieutenant answered. "There's a waitress here at La Fiora. Name's Ramona Olsen. Find out who she goes home to, and why she looks like she's trying to disappear." He ended the call, eyes still fixed on the empty kitchen door. Outside, Palermo's sunset turned the streets gold, but inside Ricardo's chest, something darker began to rise. Someone had hurt a woman under his watch, and Ricardo and Drizzy never ignored a debt, especially not this kind. By the next afternoon, Marco had his answer. But before the call ever reached Ricardo, Ramona was already fighting to survive another day inside La Fiora. The restaurant opened at 11. By 9, she was already there, hair tied too tight, uniform pressed, shoes polished until they hurt her feet. She swept the floor twice, polished the glasses once, and rehearsed the same smile in the bathroom mirror before stepping out. The smile that lied. The one that said, "I'm fine, thank you." By noon, the lunch crowd arrived. Tourists, businessmen, couples chasing romance they'd forget by morning. Ramona moved between tables like a ghost in an apron. Unseen, unheard, but necessary. She memorized orders, caught falling forks before they hit the floor, and apologized for things that weren't her fault. Every sorry was a habit now, a shield she couldn't put down. Her wrists ached. Her throat burned from holding back words. The world outside La Fiora kept spinning, but inside, time stood still, trapped between espresso cups and whispered commands. At exactly 2:15, Giorgio Mancini appeared, silk tie, clean shave, cologne that announced him 5 seconds before he spoke. The staff straightened like soldiers. Ramona's breath caught. "Good afternoon, family," he said, flashing that practiced grin, the one that could charm a table of senators and still make waitresses flinch. He walked through the dining room like he owned the air itself. And in a way, he did. Giorgio was the kind of man who could make generosity look like grace and cruelty sound like logic. He tipped big when people watched. He smiled in photos with customers. But when the doors closed, that same smile sharpened. "Ramona," he called softly as she passed with a tray. She froze. "Yes, sir." He leaned closer, brushing a non-existent speck from her sleeve. "You're late on your payment again." Her voice faltered. I I gave you everything I had last week." His eyes flicked toward her collarbone, the faint bruise he'd left there days ago. "You'll find more. You always do." He straightened, smile fixed. "We wouldn't want to complicate your position here, would we? After all I've done to keep your record clean?" Her stomach tightened. That was how he held her, not with chains, but with reminders. The favor that never stopped costing. When she first came to Palermo, broke and desperate, Giorgio had helped her fix her missing papers. She didn't ask what he'd done. She didn't want to know. Now he called it debt, interest included. Once she tried to quit. It was winter, her hands numb from washing glasses, her chest heavy from a cold that wouldn't leave. She told him she couldn't do it anymore, that she'd find work somewhere else. He smiled that same soft smile and said, "You'll do what you want, of course. But remember, I still have your file. The one with the falsified address." Then, quieter. "I could make one phone call, and immigration would love to see it." That night, she stayed. And every night after, she told herself she'd leave tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Dinner rush ended late. The kitchen lights dimmed. The laughter faded. Ramona sat alone in the staff room, legs tucked beneath her, eating cold risotto from a paper box. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Her reflection stared back from the vending machine glass. Makeup smudged, lipstick cracked, mascara tracing the corners of her eyes like bruises that refused to fade. She dabbed at her cheek, smearing the illusion of perfection she wore all day. Sometimes she wondered what her mother would think if she saw her now. The girl who once wanted to be a painter, reduced to counting tips and hiding scars. She wanted to cry, but tears took too much energy. So she just sat there, fork still in hand, and let exhaustion do the crying for her. Outside, in the alley across from La Fiora, Marco leaned against a parked car, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. He'd been there since 6, watching. He'd seen her arrive, seen her flinch when Giorgio brushed her shoulder, seen the way she carried herself like someone waiting for an earthquake. Marco wasn't a sentimental man, but he respected Ricardo's instincts. If the boss said, "Watch her," he watched. If the boss said, "Protect her," he would. And if the boss said, "Find the man who did this," he already knew whose name would come up. He flicked ash onto the ground and made a quiet note on his phone. Owner's name, Giorgio Mancini. Public front, legitimate businessman. Private habits, not so clean. Inside, he could see her through the frosted window, sitting alone, still in uniform, the kind of solitude you could feel from 50 feet away. He exhaled slowly. He'd seen a lot of broken people in his line of work, but there was something different about her. She wasn't broken yet, just cornered. At 11:03 p.m., Marco dialed. Ricardo answered on the first ring. "Well, her name's Ramona Olsen," Marco said, eyes on the restaurant window. "Works double shifts. Lives in a rented room above a bakery on Via del Porto. Owner's name is Giorgio Mancini. Looks clean, but he's not. Word is, he's been using his staff to cover his laundering." Ricardo was silent for a long moment. "And the bruises?" Marco hesitated. "He's the reason they're there, boss." A pause. Then, "Keep watching," Ricardo said. "No contact yet." He hung up before Marco could reply. Ramona left the restaurant just before midnight, the city wrapped in rain and the air heavy with diesel and sea salt. She hugged her coat tighter, crossing the empty street. Behind her, the lights of La Fiora glowed like a promise she couldn't escape. Every step home felt like walking through wet cement, slow, heavy, and futile. Upstairs, she unlocked her door, dropped her bag, and sank to the floor beside her bed. The walls were thin. She could hear the bakery ovens hum below, the city muttering outside. She wanted to believe tomorrow would be different. But the bruise beneath her sleeve said otherwise. From the alley across the street, Marco watched her light go out. He finished his cigarette and turned away, sending one last message before leaving. She's home safe. For now. He started the engine. In the rearview mirror, La Fiora's sign shimmered through the rain, elegant, golden, hollow. And as he drove off, he caught his own reflection, a man following orders, but not yet understanding why this one felt personal. Back at his apartment, Ricardo sat alone at his desk, the city stretching below like a dark ocean. He poured himself another glass of Barolo, then replayed Marco's words in his head. Giorgio Mancini. The name tasted bitter. He reached for his phone again, but stopped. Not yet. First, he wanted to see her one more time. To look her in the eyes when she smiled that careful smile, the one that lied, and decide for himself how far he was willing to go. Outside, thunder rolled over Palermo. Tomorrow, someone was going to bleed. The storm didn't stop all night. Rain crawled down the windows of Ricardo and Drizzy's penthouse like melted glass. He didn't sleep, just sat at his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, watching the lights of Palermo flicker across his wine glass. When Marco arrived the next morning, he looked like he hadn't slept either. He stood by the door, coat dripping, eyes cold. "It's the owner," he said simply. "Giorgio Mancini. He's been hitting her." Ricardo didn't look up right away. His fingers tapped the rim of the glass, slow, deliberate, the rhythm of a fuse burning. Marco continued. "He keeps her under control with fake debts. Says she owes him for paperwork, for favors. The staff know, but nobody talks. They're all afraid of losing their jobs. Or worse. Silence. Only the faint hum of rain on glass filled the room. Then Ricardo asked, quietly, "How long?" "Couple years, maybe more." He nodded once, still staring at the red swirl in his glass. "He hurts her in his own restaurant." Marco waited. Ricardo's eyes lifted, calm, almost gentle, but something dangerous flickered there. "He'll fall in his own restaurant." He set the glass down, stood, and walked to the window. "Give me everything on Mancini. Bank accounts, offshore transfers, supplier contracts. Anyone who moves money for him. I want their names on my desk." Marco gave a short nod. "And if he's connected? Then we'll unconnect him." Ricardo's tone was even. No anger, no passion, just precision. It was the tone he used when something was already decided. "Make it quiet," he added. "No noise." "Not yet." Marco hesitated. "You sure you want to get involved in this, boss? She's just a waitress." Ricardo's gaze didn't move from the window. Nobody's just anything when someone uses fear to own them. By afternoon, the reports began to flow in. Neat folders lined across Ricardo's table, Marco's handwriting looping across every margin. Each document was a vein in Giorgio Mancini's empire, and Ricardo traced them with his eyes like a surgeon finding where to cut. The man wasn't just a restaurant owner. He was laundering money through shell companies and supplier contracts. Invoices forged, wages underreported, cash flow moved offshore through culinary exports that didn't exist. A small man pretending to be legitimate until someone bigger looked closely. Ricardo smiled faintly. Greedy, sloppy. He thought nobody would ever check the sauce. Marco chuckled under his breath. "You planning to burn him?" Ricardo took another sip of wine. "Not yet. First, we take his name apart." He worked until nightfall. Palermo stretched beneath him, streets glowing gold, thunder still echoing somewhere over the port. Every page he turned revealed another weakness, an unpaid tax, a false signature, an employee complaint quietly buried. "Powerful men," Ricardo murmured, "leave fingerprints everywhere when they think no one's looking." Marco leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's the plan?" "Leverage," Ricardo said. "We'll start with his suppliers. If Mancini cooks his books, someone's cooking with him. Find me a name, the one who can't afford to lose him." He looked up, Everyone has a weak link. Pull that thread, the whole suit unravels. Later that night, when Marco left, Ricardo stayed alone with the silence. He poured the last of the Barolo and stared at his reflection in the window. The face of a man who'd spent a lifetime punishing betrayal, now drawn into a war he didn't plan. He didn't know Ramona Olsen beyond a few fleeting moments, but he remembered the way she'd looked at her own hand when he held it, as if she didn't deserve to be treated gently. He hated that look, because he'd seen it before, years ago, on someone he couldn't save. He set the glass down and reached for the phone. "Enzo," he said when the line picked up. "Yeah, boss. I need eyes on La Fiora's deliveries. Every truck, every crate, every payment." Quietly. "You expecting trouble?" "I'm expecting proof." He hung up, leaned back, and let the rain fill the silence again. Across the city, Giorgio Mancini toasted a group of investors at his restaurant, laughing too loud, smiling too wide. He didn't notice the two new men sitting near the window, customers who never ordered dessert, only watched. He didn't notice the courier who took photos of the invoices he left on his desk. He didn't notice the quiet web forming around him, thread by thread. But he would, soon, because somewhere above him, a man with no patience for cruelty was writing his downfall like a confession. That night, Ricardo stepped out onto his balcony, rain washing the city clean. He thought of the life he'd built, every sin justified by a code. No children, no innocence, no pain for the powerless. Mancini broke all three. Ricardo lit a cigarette and let the smoke rise. He wasn't angry. Anger made men sloppy. This was something colder, sharper, the kind of calm that comes before a knife slides through silk. Marco's report lay open on the table beside him, the final page marked with a note. Staff whispers. She tried to quit once. He threatened to call immigration. Ricardo's eyes lingered on the sentence. Then he said, softly, almost to himself, he used the law to hide his crimes. I'll use his own money to expose them. He stubbed out the cigarette and walked back inside. By midnight, calls had been made. Files were duplicated, accounts flagged, numbers cross-checked. The kind of work that left no trace, only consequences. And somewhere in a dim apartment above a bakery, Ramona slept for the first time in days, unaware that her name had already become a mission. Ricardo didn't believe in redemption, but he believed in balance. And by morning, Palermo would start to tilt. Ever met someone powerful enough to ruin lives with a signature? That's why you need stories that show you how to see them coming. Subscribe. It might just teach you how to survive people like Giorgio. The rain stopped, but the city hadn't calmed. Palermo pulsed with quiet restlessness, a heartbeat beneath its marble streets and velvet night. Somewhere among those shadows, Ricardo Endrizzi was weaving a net. Not one made of bullets or threats, but of paper, passwords, and silence. Violence was easy. Justice required patience. For the next few days, he barely left his office. The blinds stayed half-drawn, letting the faintest light filter across the floor. Piles of files and laptops covered his desk, forming an empire of secrets. Marco came and went without words. Coffee went cold before it was finished. The only sound was the occasional scratch of a pen or the hum of a machine decrypting stolen information. Ricardo didn't rush it. Every move was deliberate, every silence intentional. The first domino fell when his accountant, Vittorio, arrived with a folder bound in red twine. A quiet man, gray hair slicked back, always smelling faintly of ink and expensive tobacco. He spoke rarely, but when he did, numbers trembled. I went through La Fiora's books, Vittorio said, sliding the folder across the desk. You were right. It's rotten. Ricardo leaned forward. Show me. Inside were copies of supplier invoices, hundreds of them. Flour, wine, seafood, meat. But Vittorio pointed to the signatures. Half of these companies don't exist. Payments routed through ghost firms in Monaco, Cyprus, and Belize. Each tied to the same account under a different name, GM Holdings. Ricardo studied the initials. Giorgio Mancini. Where does the money end up, he asked. Offshore. Then filtered back through property purchases. A chain designed to hide import violations. And worse. Vittorio hesitated. Some payments match known trafficking routes. Southern ports. Dock shipments disguised as restaurant supplies. Ricardo's jaw tightened. Human or product? Both. The silence after that was heavy. Even the city noise outside seemed to fade. Ricardo's fingers tapped the desk once, twice. That same quiet rhythm Marco had learned to fear. Good work, he said finally. Leave the originals. Burn your copies. Vittorio nodded and left without another word. When the door shut, Ricardo opened his drawer and took out a small flash drive. He slipped it into the laptop, uploading the files. It wasn't rage that fueled him now. It was purpose. Men like Giorgio thrived in the illusion of invincibility. They believed the law was a wall they could hide behind. Ricardo preferred to use the law as a mirror. By midnight, the hacker had joined the storm. She was known only as Lyra, a ghost in the digital world. 22, reckless, brilliant. She'd once breached the Ministry of Finance for sport, then spent 3 months hiding in Thailand. Ricardo paid her enough to disappear again if she needed to. Her voice came through the encrypted call, filtered and cold. You weren't exaggerating. The guy's entire email chain is a crime scene. What did you find? Partnerships, she said. Smugglers from Naples. Politicians in Palermo's council. He's been trading favors. Votes for silence, silence for cash. There's also surveillance footage from La Fiora's staff quarters. He's been recording his employees. Ricardo's hand froze on the mouse. Recording them? Every room. Even the women's changing area. He closed his eyes for a moment, a deep breath steadying the burn in his chest. When he spoke again, his voice was low and even. Package everything. Encrypted drive. No trace back to you. Lyra hesitated. You're going to the police? No, Ricardo said. To the press. By dawn, the city was still asleep when a series of anonymous emails landed in inboxes across Palermo. Investigative journalists, legal offices, prosecutors, each received a perfectly organized package. Proof of corruption, abuse, exploitation. No threats, no demands, just evidence too clean to ignore. Ricardo watched the city wake from his window. The streets filled, unaware that its favorite restaurant was already bleeding beneath the surface. He poured himself coffee, not wine this time, and sat quietly while the headlines began to spread like sparks. By noon, they were everywhere. Celebrity restaurateur accused of staff exploitation. Palermo's golden chef under investigation for fraud and abuse. Inside La Fiora, glamour built on fear. Phones rang across the city. Reporters gathered at the restaurant's entrance. Cameras flashed. The staff whispered in corners, wondering who had finally spoken up. Ramona heard it first through a co-worker's trembling voice. She didn't believe it at first, thought it was a cruel joke. But then she saw it. Giorgio's face on the television in the staff room, his smile frozen mid-lie. She stood there, hands clasped, feeling her throat tighten with something between relief and disbelief. In his office, Giorgio Mancini was losing control for the first time in years. Calls came in faster than he could answer. Investors wanted explanations. Journalists demanded statements. His lawyer told him to stay quiet, but his ego couldn't. He slammed the phone down, cursing. Who did this? Nobody answered. Down the street, at his table by the window, Ricardo and Drizzy read the same headline with a calm expression. The morning light poured through the glass, warm against his face. He stirred his coffee once, watching the swirl, then said quietly to Marco, "The cracks have started." Marco nodded. What next? Ricardo's gaze stayed on the newspaper. Nothing. Let the truth do the work. He folded the paper neatly, slid it aside, and looked toward La Fiora. Even from here, he could see the crowd gathering outside. The golden logo above its doors gleamed in the sun, beautiful and broken. a facade that no longer hid the rot underneath. Palermo buzzed with scandal, its elite whispering over glasses of wine, pretending they hadn't once praised the man now drowning in disgrace. The city was a stage of masks and mirrors, and Ricardo knew how easily both could shatter. He leaned back, voice low enough for only Marco to hear. "You build empires out of fear," he said, "and one day, fear eats you alive." For the first time in years, Ricardo smiled. Not out of joy, but because justice, in its quietest form, had finally started to sing. And far away, in the staff quarters of a shuttered restaurant, Ramona Olsen sat alone, trembling, as she realized someone had just rewritten her story, not with pity, but power. The noise inside La Fiora had changed. Where once there was laughter and polite conversation, now there was tension, a current that hummed beneath the crystal chandeliers and fine china. The waiters moved faster, speaking less. Customers noticed the difference but couldn't name it. They just felt something in the air, the fragile kind of quiet that comes before thunder. Ramona felt it most of all. Giorgio Mancini had become a shadow of the man he pretended to be. His easy smile was gone. His temper, once kept behind closed doors, now slipped through every crack. She watched him pace the floor of his office through the small glass window near the kitchen, shouting into his phone, red-faced and sweating through his tailored suit. "I don't care what they printed," he snapped. "Find out who talked. Someone in my staff opened their mouth. I want a name." He slammed the phone down so hard the sound echoed through the hallway. The entire kitchen froze. Pans stopped clattering. Someone dropped a plate, and the shatter made everyone flinch. Ramona bent her head, pretending to polish glasses, but her heart raced. Over the next few days, the routine she had built, the numb rhythm of surviving, began to crumble. Giorgio stormed through the restaurant at all hours, calling staff one by one into his office. Every time someone went in, they came out pale and shaking. When her turn came, Ramona could feel her pulse in her throat. He gestured for her to sit. His voice was soft, almost gentle, the way a snake might whisper before it strikes. "You've been here a while, haven't you, Ramona?" "Yes, sir. You're a good worker. Quiet. Loyal." He poured himself a drink, swirling the amber liquid. "I've always trusted you. But lately, the papers have been saying terrible things. Lies. Someone's been feeding them stories." She said nothing. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Giorgio smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "If I ever found out someone here betrayed me, I'd make sure they never worked again. In this city, or anywhere." He took a slow sip, watching her reaction. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," she whispered. He leaned back. "Good girl. You can go." Ramona stood on trembling legs and left his office, every step feeling heavier than the last. The moment she reached the corridor, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. By the end of that week, the fear was back. That old, familiar weight pressing on her chest. The bruises had faded, but the panic hadn't. She wanted to quit, to pack her things, leave the city, vanish. But she couldn't. The debt Giorgio forged in her name still lingered in the system. Her paycheck was docked. Her options were gone. She was trapped again. That night, after closing, Ramona stayed behind to wipe tables. The restaurant was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge and the faint sound of rain outside. She thought she was alone until she heard his voice. Giorgio's office door was slightly ajar. Inside, he was pacing again, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, but every word felt sharp enough to cut through the air. "Listen to me," he hissed. "This leak came from inside. I want them found. I don't care what it takes. Check their calls, their homes. Someone in my staff is dead when I find them." Her blood ran cold. She backed away from the door quietly, afraid the floor might creak. Her hand brushed against a glass on the table, and it almost slipped. She caught it just in time, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't sleep that night. The next day, She worked in silence, eyes on the floor, praying Giorgio wouldn't notice her shaking hands. Every knock on the kitchen door made her flinch. Every shadow that passed felt like a threat. But when she turned around during the evening shift, she froze. Table 6 was occupied. Ricardo and Drizzy sat where he always did, calm, composed, the storm behind his eyes perfectly still. His presence filled the room without a sound. Even the staff moved differently when he was there, as if gravity itself shifted toward him. Ramona tried to steady her breathing before approaching his table. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. He looked up at her, gaze sharp as glass. "You look tired." She forced a small smile. "It's been busy." "Busy," he repeated, voice flat. His eyes flicked briefly to her wrist, the same wrist he had noticed before. The scar was faint now, barely visible under her sleeve, but he saw it. He saw everything. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said quietly. Her breath caught. The words hit harder than she expected. Pretending. It was what she'd been doing for months. Pretending to be fine. Pretending the pain was gone. Pretending she was invisible. She lowered her eyes. "If I talk," she whispered, "he'll destroy me." Ricardo didn't move for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, voice low but steady. "Then I'll destroy him first." She looked up, startled. There was no arrogance in his tone, no threat laced with cruelty, only certainty. The kind of quiet promise that didn't need volume to be believed. He placed a folded bill on the table, the payment for his untouched drink, and rose to his feet. Before he left, he met her gaze one more time. "Keep your head down," he said. "Not your spirit." When the door closed behind him, Ramona felt the air shift. The tension didn't vanish, it just changed shape. For the first time, she wasn't the only one carrying it. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the sea. The kind of low, distant rumble that warns you what's coming. In the reflection of the restaurant window, she saw herself, bruises fading, eyes tired but alive. Somewhere beneath the fear, something small flickered back to life. Hope. And in another part of Palermo, Ricardo and Drizzy stood by his car, lighting a cigarette he never smoked. The flame illuminated his face for a moment. Sharp lines, sharper intent. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke twist into the night. "The storm's coming," Marco said beside him. Ricardo nodded, eyes on the glowing lights of La Fiora. "No," he murmured. "It's already here." It began with a headline, then another, then a flood. Every morning, the city woke up to fresh scandal. La Fiora's name, once synonymous with luxury and charm, now dripped from every front page like a curse. Celebrity restaurateur accused of exploiting staff. Inside Palermo's hidden empire of fear. Sources reveal pattern of abuse and fraud at La Fiora. The story spread faster than wildfire. Social media tore into Giorgio Mancini with a hunger only the internet could muster. Clips, screenshots, anonymous testimonies. Each one stripped away another layer of the golden mask he'd worn for years. And then came the footage. A grainy video, clearly taken from a hidden camera behind the kitchen shelf. It showed Giorgio mid-rage, screaming at a waiter. His words were venom, his gestures violent. He hurled a plate against the wall. It shattered inches from the terrified man's head. The clip cut there, but it was enough. Within hours, it had gone viral. News anchors replayed it in slow motion, analyzing his tone, his slurs, the fear in the waiter's eyes. By evening, La Fiora's doors were locked, its lights off. Reporters camped outside the gates, cameras flashing at every shadow. Inside his apartment, Giorgio paced like a trapped animal. His phone buzzed constantly, partners withdrawing, lawyers panicking, journalists demanding comment. Every call ended the same way. Slammed phone, another drink poured, another curse thrown into the air. When the next set of headlines dropped, even he couldn't deny the scale of what was coming. Tax fraud investigation targets La Fiora Group. Offshore accounts tied to politicians and smuggling routes. The journalists didn't stop at the abuse. They dug deeper. And deeper still. Invoices. Forged contracts. Bank transfers leading to shell companies in Malta. Payments disguised as import fees that match police reports of missing cargo shipments. The empire he'd built on deceit was crumbling, one receipt at a time. By the end of the week, every investor had vanished. Suppliers refused deliveries. His accountant stopped answering his calls. Even the mayor, once a regular guest at La Fiora, publicly denied ever knowing him. Giorgio stood at his window, watching the flashing lights outside his building. Not police, not yet, but press. A crowd had gathered below, shouting questions he couldn't bear to hear. He whispered to himself, "Who did this?" But somewhere deep down, he already knew. Across the city, the restaurant televisions glowed with the same chaos. At table 6, his usual, sat Ricardo and Drizzy. Calm, deliberate, untouchable. The lunch crowd was thinner now, the air thick with the low murmur of scandal. Waiters stole glances toward him, but said nothing. He was always there, always composed, as if the storm outside didn't exist. On the TV behind the bar, the news anchor's voice trembled with rehearsed gravity. Ongoing investigations reveal new links between Giorgio Mancini's hospitality group and offshore accounts connected to illegal shipments through Sicily's southern ports. Ricardo stirred his espresso slowly, the silver spoon clinking against porcelain. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched. Marco approached quietly, sliding into the seat across from him. "You've seen it all," he said, gesturing toward the screen. "He's finished. Completely." Ricardo didn't look up. No one's finished until they admit they've lost. Marco smirked faintly. He won't get that chance. The prosecutors are waiting. They'll eat him alive. Finally, Ricardo looked up, eyes sharp, distant. They'll eat what's left. The city's just cleaning what I already burned. He set his spoon down, movements precise, deliberate, the ritual of a man who controlled even silence. "You think Ramona knows?" Marco asked. "She'll know soon enough," Ricardo said. His tone wasn't cold. It was careful, thoughtful. "She deserves to see the truth. Not just for him to fall, but to understand that she wasn't crazy. The world finally saw what she lived." The TV played another clip, grainy footage of Giorgio being escorted from his restaurant by investigators. He wasn't handcuffed, not yet, but his face said everything. Pride curdled into panic. The anchor's voice cut through the hum of the cafe. When questioned about the allegations of tax evasion and workplace abuse, Giorgio Mancini declined to comment. Ricardo leaned back, eyes fixed on the screen. He raised his cup, took a slow sip, and murmured to no one in particular. "Justice doesn't always wear a badge." Marco's expression softened. "You think the city will remember that?" Ricardo's lips twitched. Not a smile, not really. They always do. Just never for long. Ramona found out that night. One of the younger waiters, the same boy who'd once helped her carry plates, burst into the empty restaurant where she was wiping down tables. "Ramona," he said breathlessly, "it's everywhere. The news. They've exposed him, everything. The debts, the yelling, the fake contracts. He's done." She stared at him for a long moment, her cloth frozen mid-motion. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. He nodded, pulling out his phone, showing her the headlines, the footage. Giorgio's voice filled the small dining room. That same rage, now replayed for the world. Her knees almost gave out. She sat in the nearest chair, covering her mouth with trembling hands. The world around her blurred, the hum of the fridge, the flicker of the ceiling light, until all she could hear was her own heartbeat. For the first time in months, she didn't feel fear. She felt release. Not joy, not vengeance, just silence, the kind that comes after years of noise. When she finally looked up, the tears in her eyes weren't from sadness. They were from disbelief. The monster had finally been seen. Outside, the city buzzed with the noise of scandal and gossip. But inside La Fiora, Ramona sat alone at one of the tables, breathing slowly, like a woman learning how to do it again. She looked at her reflection in the window, the faint scar on her face, the shadow of who she'd been, and whispered to herself, almost in prayer, "It's over." Across the street, parked in a dark sedan, Ricardo watched her through the glass. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The job was done. But the look in his eyes said what words never could. This wasn't mercy. It was balance. As he lit his cigarette, the flame flickered once against the window pane, reflecting beside Ramona's faint smile. The rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. And in the quiet hum of Palermo, one empire died, so another could sleep easy. The empire didn't crumble in silence. It screamed as it fell. By the end of that week, Giorgio Mancini was a ghost in his own kingdom. His bank accounts were frozen, his phone lines dead. Every luxury he'd used to define himself, the cars, the tailored suits, the fine wine, became reminders of everything he could no longer afford. The papers had stopped calling him visionary. Now they called him suspect. His name was poison, his restaurant a ruin. The staff he'd ruled with fear stopped showing up. Investors erased his number. Even his lawyers started traveling indefinitely. And yet, somehow, amid all that ruin, he found one thing left to hold on to, his hatred. It had to be someone inside. Someone close. Someone who smiled while stabbing him in the back. In his paranoia, he convinced himself it was her. Ramona Olsen, the quiet waitress. The one who looked away when he spoke, who never defended him when reporters came asking. The one whose eyes, he now realized, had changed, no longer scared, but distant, detached. She knew. He was certain of it. And when certainty mixes with fear, something inside a man like Giorgio breaks. That night, La Fiora was empty, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of a flickering light over the counter. Rain battered the windows, smearing the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. Ramona stayed behind to close, same as always. The new manager hadn't shown up. The staff had all but vanished. She moved through the silent dining room, stacking chairs, folding napkins, moving like someone trying to convince herself that routine still meant safety. She didn't hear him come in. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. The sound made her turn. Giorgio stood by the entrance, his once perfect suit disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. The smell of alcohol clung to him like sweat. "You," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "Mr. Mancini, the restaurant's closed." "You can't." "Don't," he snapped, stepping closer. "Don't pretend respect now. I know it was you." She took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Of course you don't. You never do you? Always quiet. Always innocent." His voice dropped to a low growl. "But someone told them everything. And you're the only one who had a reason." "I had no reason," she whispered. "You had every reason," he shouted, slamming his fist on the nearest table. The glasses rattled. "Ungrateful little liar. After everything I did for you. I gave you a job. I kept your name clean when no one else would touch you." "You own me," she said, barely above a whisper, but the words cut through the silence like glass. Giorgio's eyes flickered. Rage met disbelief. Before she could move, he grabbed her wrist. Hard. The same wrist. The same scar. Pain shot through her arm. "You think you can run from me?" he hissed. His breath reeked of whiskey. "You think you can destroy me and just walk away?" Her voice trembled. "Please let go." He tightened his grip, dragging her closer. "You don't tell me what to do, you." The sound stopped him cold. A soft creak of a door opening behind them. Slow. Measured. Then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving across the floor. Giorgio turned, hand still clamped on her wrist. Ricardo and Drizzy stood in the doorway. Black coat, eyes like winter steel. Two men flanked him. Marco and another enforcer, both silent as shadows. For a moment, nobody spoke. Ricardo's gaze dropped to Giorgio's hand, then to Ramona's face. Pale, trembling, the old terror flickering back to life. When he finally spoke, His voice was calm, controlled, deadly quiet. Let go of her. Giorgio froze. His grip faltered. Ricardo took a few steps forward, unhurried, his shoes echoing softly on the tiled floor. It looks, he said, like you're touching something that doesn't belong to you. The words hung in the air, soft but suffocating. Giorgio tried to laugh. It came out cracked and brittle. You think you can walk in here and threaten me? You're no better than. Ricardo's hand flicked slightly. Marco moved before Giorgio could finish. In one smooth motion, he wrenched Giorgio's arm free from Ramona's and slammed him against the table. The glasses shattered, scattering shards across the floor. Giorgio gasped, half in shock, half in fear. Careful, Ricardo said quietly, picking up a napkin from a nearby chair, brushing a fleck of dust from his cuff. He's still breathing. For now. Marco's partner yanked Giorgio upright. The man who once commanded a staff of 50 now looked small, rumpled, shaking, his arrogance leaking away with every breath. Ricardo stepped closer, face to face. You built an empire on fear, he said softly. But you forgot something. Giorgio's voice broke. What? Ricardo leaned in, his tone almost kind. Fear only works until someone scarier walks in. He turned slightly. Take him. The two men dragged Giorgio toward the door. He struggled weakly, shouting hoarse threats about lawyers, connections, the police, words that sounded emptier each time they left his mouth. Ramona stood frozen, one hand on her wrist, her mind unable to catch up with what was happening. When the door finally slammed shut behind them, silence filled the room again, but not the kind she'd grown used to. This one was clean. Final. Ricardo looked at her. Did he hurt you? She shook her head, though her voice trembled when she spoke. No, not this time. He nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the broken glass at her feet. Good. Then tonight, he learns what it feels like to be powerless. Ramona stared at him, unsure whether to thank him or fear him. But before she could speak, he turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. You'll hear stories tomorrow, he said without turning around. Some true, some not. Don't bother believing any of them. Just know one thing. He looked back at her, eyes steady. You're free now. Make it mean something. Then he was gone. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean, one secret at a time. And inside the dark, silent restaurant, Ramona finally exhaled. The echo of his words lingered in the air long after he'd left. You're free now. This time, she believed it. If you ever doubted that silence can be lethal, remember this. Justice moves quietly until it hits. Subscribe so you never miss the moment silence turns to power. Morning came like judgment. By sunrise, the city of Palermo had stopped pretending not to know. The story that broke overnight had already spread across every television, every radio, every phone screen glowing in the dark. Famed restaurateur Giorgio Mancini accused of assault, fraud, and staff exploitation. The headline ran like wildfire, but it was the footage that made people stop mid-bite at their breakfast tables. Hidden camera clips, Giorgio yelling at waitresses, grabbing one by the arm, threatening another over unpaid debts. Recordings of late-night phone calls, his voice dripping with arrogance. Screenshots of bank transfers to offshore accounts labeled consulting fees, payments that didn't lead anywhere legitimate. Even the people who used to shake his hand turned down the volume in their offices, pretending not to hear. Palermo had loved its golden boy, the man who could charm ministers and models alike. Now they watched his empire rot in real time. La Fiora, once a temple of power and taste, was sealed off by police tape by mid-morning. Black cars lined the curb, flashing blue lights reflected in the restaurant's glass facade. Reporters swarmed the entrance, microphones raised, cameras rolling. Inside, detectives moved through the elegant dining room where piano music used to play. The tables were covered in dust sheets, the air thick with the ghost of last night's rain and shame. A crime scene now, not a place of luxury. One officer paused by table 6, where Ricardo and Drizzy used to sit. He didn't know it, but justice had begun right there, not with a gun or a threat, but a quiet question. Who hurt you? Across town, Ramona Olson watched it unfold from the safety of a small apartment she hadn't seen in daylight for weeks. She sat on the edge of her couch, the news playing softly on her old TV. Giorgio's face filled the screen, not smiling this time, not shaking hands with politicians. His mugshot looked smaller than she remembered him. Behind him, the bright flash of cameras caught the moment he was led in handcuffs through the courthouse steps. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Relief hit her like a wave, followed by something she hadn't felt in months, air that didn't choke. When the reporters began reading out the names of victims willing to testify, she froze. Her name wasn't there. Not yet. Ricardo had made sure of that. Instead, anonymous testimonies appeared. Former waiters, kitchen hands, cleaners. Each story a piece of the puzzle, each voice a part of the truth she'd carried in silence. The anchor's voice trembled as she read aloud. One waitress described repeated threats. She was told she owed her employer for helping her avoid legal trouble, a debt that never existed. Ramona's eyes burned. She knew those words were hers, even if no one else did. A knock sounded at her door. Soft, measured. She hesitated, then opened it just enough to see Marco standing there, rain still clinging to his coat. He didn't step inside. He just held out an envelope. From the boss, he said. You don't need to worry about rent anymore. Or debts. Or paperwork. It's all gone. She blinked, confused. Gone. He nodded once. Erased. Like it never existed. Ramona's throat tightened. Why would he do that for me? Marco gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. He said you reminded him of someone who didn't get saved in time. Then he tipped his hat and turned down the hallway, vanishing before she could ask more. Inside the envelope was a single folded note, written in careful handwriting. No one owns you anymore. Ari. She read it twice before her tears blurred the ink. By evening, the entire city seemed to pulse with the same conversation, in cafes, markets, taxis, and boardrooms. Everyone had a theory about how it all happened. Some said it was the government cleaning house. Others whispered about journalists with secret sources. But under all the noise, one rumor carried more weight than any headline. They say Drizzy did it. The name passed from mouth to mouth like a warning and a prayer. Ricardo Drizzy, the man no one dared cross, the one who never involved himself in other people's business until now. In the neighborhoods near the docks, old men nodded silently at the mention of him. In offices uptown, executives whispered and locked their phones before saying his name. To some, he was a ghost. To others, a necessary evil. But that morning, even the city's corrupt breathed a little differently, because Palermo had seen something they'd long forgotten existed. A man who could ruin you without firing a bullet. That night, Ramona stood on her small balcony, the city glittering beneath her like spilled diamonds. Somewhere out there, she knew, Ricardo sat at his usual table, maybe sipping espresso, maybe just watching the world rebuild itself around the wreckage he'd caused. She touched the faint scar on her wrist. It didn't ache anymore. The news still played faintly inside, replaying Giorgio's arrest, the chaos, the shame. But she didn't turn it off. She wanted to hear it again, to believe it wasn't a dream. Palermo had finally watched and believed. In the quiet heart of the city, far from the flashing lights and breaking news, Ricardo Drizzy sat in a dim cafe overlooking the harbor. Marco stood nearby, watching the rain blur the windows. It's done, Marco said. He's finished. Ricardo didn't answer right away. He stirred his espresso, eyes fixed on the reflection of the city lights rippling on the water. Finally, he said, no one ever really finishes, Marco. They just get remembered differently. Marco frowned. And her? Ramona? Ricardo's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She'll learn to live again. That's enough. He placed a few euros on the table and stood. As he stepped into the rain, his silhouette melted into the city's pulse, another shadow moving through Palermo, unseen but felt. Behind him, the cafe's television repeated the same headline for the 100th time. Mancini's fall, Palermo's darling, turns devil. And somewhere beneath it, another voice whispered quietly through the city's veins. Indrizzi did this. A name both feared and revered. The ghost who made justice look like vengeance and vengeance feel like mercy. The city would keep watching. But now, it watched differently. Because once you've seen what power can do in silence, you never forget who taught you to look deeper. Weeks passed. The city moved on, as cities do. Scandals faded into gossip. Gossip faded into silence. And silence, once again, became Palermo's native language. La Fiora reopened under new ownership. The gold trim on its windows gleamed brighter, the marble floors scrubbed of their ghosts. The new management spoke softly, smiled often, and treated their staff like people instead of property. The city's elite returned, pretending nothing had ever happened. They clinked glasses over imported wine, whispering about fresh starts and rebranding. But for those who had lived the story, the waiters, the cleaners, the cooks who once flinched at footsteps, the walls still held memories. Shadows didn't disappear. They just learned to stand still. Ramona Olsen moved differently now. She walked through the restaurant with steady steps, her chin lifted, her voice calm but sure. The fear that once lived in her eyes had burned away, replaced by something quieter and stronger. Her scar remained, a faint white thread across her wrist, but even that seemed to wear a new meaning. When she smiled now, it wasn't for survival. It was because she finally could. The first night La Fiora reopened, she saw him. Riccardo Indrizzi. He was seated at table 6, as if no time had passed. The same dark suit, the same stillness. His eyes wandered absently toward the window where the last orange light of sunset poured across the city. For a moment, she froze, the same way she had the first night she'd ever met him. Only this time, her hands didn't shake. She approached quietly, coffee pot in hand. "Espresso?" she asked. He looked up, meeting her gaze. The corner of his mouth curved slightly. "Always." She poured it slowly, carefully, the scent curling between them. When she set the cup down, he noticed it immediately, the steadiness of her grip, the calm in her face. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. His tone was gentle, but final, a man who'd never asked for gratitude and didn't intend to start now. Ramona nodded, her voice soft but firm. "I know." She hesitated, then added, "But I'll never forget." For the first time, his expression flickered. A small acknowledgement, a trace of warmth in a face carved from years of silence. He didn't answer. He just lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and turned back toward the window. Outside, Palermo glowed under the dying sun. The same streets that once hid darkness now gilded in light. From where he sat, the city looked peaceful, almost innocent. But Riccardo knew better. He always had. The world didn't change because justice arrived. It changed because someone finally decided it should. And when that work was done, truly done, you didn't need applause. You didn't even need to stay. He placed a few euros on the table. Exact change, as always. When he rose, Ramona caught herself wanting to say something. "Thank you. Goodbye. Be careful." But the words never came. He didn't look back, and she knew he wouldn't. Some men burned their enemies. Riccardo Indrizzi erased them. As he stepped into the street, the crowd folded around him, swallowing him whole. Just another man in a city that pretended not to watch. But Palermo remembered. Every time a powerful name crossed the news, every time someone smiled too wide and whispered too softly, the city thought of him, the man who dismantled monsters without ever raising his voice. And somewhere in the hum of the evening, between the clatter of plates and the distant hum of the sea, Ramona swore she heard his voice again, low, steady, certain. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. She smiled, turned back to her tables, and poured another cup of coffee. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, music, life, all the things it should have been from the start. Outside, the city exhaled, unaware that the man who had rewritten its balance of fear and mercy was already gone. Because men like Ricardo didn't linger for thanks. They didn't wait for statues or speeches. They simply moved on to the next shadow that needed light. Some people hide monsters behind charm, and some destroy monsters behind silence. If stories like this remind you that not all heroes wear halos, subscribe right now, before the next one slips through the cracks.